In this video, I'm going to help you cast your fly rod just a little bit better. If you're just getting started with fly fishing or thinking about getting started with fly fishing and you're a little bit intimidated about the casting process, after you watch this video, I promise you, you're gonna cast a whole lot better because we're gonna go over some basic things that if you apply and practice, you will cast that fly rod better than you are today. And be sure to stick to the end of the video because I'm gonna give you a fly fishing tip that really makes a huge difference when casting a fly rod. So the first thing we wanna start with is a grip, right? There is a specific grip that you wanna use when casting a fly rod. You want to either use your thumb or your forefinger as leverage on the cork. You do not wanna hold the fly rod like a suitcase handle. I use my thumb. It's just a more comfortable and natural way to hold onto the fly rod. So that is the way that I choose to hold the fly rod, is putting my thumb on top of the cork. The next thing you want to do is you want to pull out the leader and a rod's length of fly line out the front of your rod. You want to have at least 9 feet of floating line from the tip of your rod when you start making the cast. A lot of new fly fishers will try to make that cast with either no floating line from the tip or just the leader. That is not enough to start building energy and speed to get that fly line to start flying out of the guide. So you want to have a full length of fly line from the tip of the rod. That's where you start. Now, if you're brand new to fly fishing, there is a mental discipline you have to have when you begin the cast. I like to teach anyone that's just starting a mental discipline of not allowing the rod to go back any further than 2 o'clock and no further forward than 10 o'clock. Now, as you start progressing with fly fishing, you will lengthen the arc of that cast based off of the distance. It gets shorter on shorter casts and longer on longer casts. But for the sake of somebody who's just started, you want to have a mental discipline of 10 to 2. And if you keep that mental discipline, then that rod is not going to go too far back on a back cast and too far forward. That really does influence the cast if your arc is too wide on a shorter cast. So in the beginning, start in your brain, no further back than 2, no further forward than 10, and you're going to have a much better result. And when we start progressing in fly casting, we'll talk about how the arc of a rod will increase with distance. So that is the best practice if you're just starting out with fly fishing. The next thing you want to consider is creating a straight line path to the tip of your fly rod. Some new fly fishers have a tendency to snap their wrist, turn their wrist during the cast, which does not create a straight line path with the tip of the fly rod. If your fly line or if your rod tip is kind of arcing back and forth, your fly line is going to follow the path of your tip. So one thing you'll learn later on in fly casting, that you can influence where the line goes by adjusting where your rod is pointing at the end of the cast. So your fly line will follow the path of the tip of your rod. So when you're casting, look back at your rod tip to make sure that you're not turning in or turning out or snapping your wrist when you're going back on that back cast. So that's very important to create as best you can that straight line path. Next is your cadence. Think of a hand of a grandfather clock, right? You want to have a slight delay on the back of your cast and a slight delay when you bring it forward, right? It's not a matter of whipping it back and forth as fast as you can. You want to create a nice cadence when you are casting a fly rod. If you have the opportunity, you're out in the boat or in a float tube, or you have room behind you, a lot of people that I've casted, I just said, as soon as you're ready to bring it forward, wait a half a second longer and then bring it forward. A lot of new fly casters will try to whip it back and forth too quick and won't allow the line to fully extend out behind you before bringing it forward. And it's very important to start feeling that flow and having that very patient cadence. You do that and you're going to find that the line will just start to generate speed, The rod is building up energy and transfers that energy into the fly line. But you have to have that cadence. Another thing I want you to consider, when you got the cadence down, you want to have a hard stop on the back and a hard stop in the front. That helps transfer the energy that the rod is creating into the line. So you cast back, hard stop. Cast forward, hard stop. That is a tip that you want to remember when casting a fly rod. Do that once you get the cadence down. Practice that hard stop in the back, hard stop in the front. Now you want to pull out a little more line. So if you're trying to shoot for maybe a 30 or 40 foot cast, you're going to want to have that line pulled from your reel and at the ready. Sometimes we use a stripping basket. Sometimes the line is just at our feet. But you want to be able to pull enough line out of your reel to be able to achieve that 30 or 40 foot cast. Pro tip, you saw that I was stretching the line out. Sometimes if line has stayed on the reel for long periods of time, this is not a large arbor reel, so it has a tendency, the line has a tendency to have a memory and stay curled. I do a little stretching of the line just prior to my first cast. So if that happens to you, that's pretty normal. Large arbor reels help mitigate that, but if you have a smaller arbor reel like I have here, stretching the line out before you start fishing or casting will help keep things from getting tangled. Another tip you want to consider when casting a fly rod, when you start that line you just pulled out of the reel, now you want to start allowing the line to carefully roll through the left or right hand, depending on how you're casting. So I'm a right-handed caster, and I'm always controlling the line with my left hand. So even though I'm holding the line and I'm making sure there's no slack that's created from the reel all the way to the tip of the fly, that's super important. As soon as you get slack, that's when you get the whole spaghetti factory in front of your fly rod. So control the slack of your line and you're gonna have a much better result. Sorry for the wind. So as you can see, I'm casting right-handed. I've got the fly line loosely held in my left hand, but I'm not gonna allow any type of slack to be created when I'm casting. So I'm just kind of letting the line slowly travel through my hand without creating slack. And finally, the final cast, I drop the tip of my rod down and I'm ready to start fishing. Finally, and the big thing that you need to consider, fly line really does make all the difference. If you have a crappy, cheap fly line, you're gonna really struggle with casting your fly rod. Fly line makes a huge difference. You could have a good rod, a solid rod, an average reel, but with the right fly line, a good fly line, it'll make all the difference. And there's a lot of great fly lines out there. I prefer Rio. It's just a personal preference. But there are a lot of other manufacturers from Orvis to Cortland that make a great fly line. But spend the money on a fly line. It will make all the difference when casting a fly rod. All right. Well, I hope that helps you when you are out there casting. And if you've been casting for quite some time now and you just need a little help adding some distance, I put a video together right here that talks just about doing that, adding distance to your fly cast. But before you do that, practice and then advance yourself to something a little more advanced. All right, hope that's helped you cast just a little bit further. Until the next time, fish on.